Imagine this. You're walking home on a calm Saturday afternoon, carrying nothing more than groceries for a quiet evening, when suddenly you realize someone is following you. Their footsteps echo behind you, steady and deliberate. At first, you think it's nothing, just another neighbor heading home. But then you feel their eyes locked on you, their hand brushing something at their side. In that split second, your instincts scream, "This is not normal." That's exactly what Angela Johnson felt that day. Angela was no ordinary resident. To the neighbors, she appeared like anyone else. A calm, composed woman in her late 30s with a kind smile and a quiet lifestyle. But beneath her approachable exterior was a strength no one could have guessed. She was a highly trained FBI tactical commander, someone who had led operations against dangerous criminals, someone who knew exactly how to stay calm under pressure. Yet today she wasn't in her tactical gear or surrounded by her teammate or just team. She was simply a woman coming home, dressed casually, groceries in hand. The neighborhood was peaceful, almost too peaceful. Children rode their bikes along the sidewalk, their laughter filling the air. A lawnmower buzzed faintly in the distance. Everything seemed ordinary, except for one man. He stood near the HOA's front gate in a self-styled security uniform. His posture was stiff, his movements restless, as if he was waiting for something or someone. Angela noticed him briefly but thought little of it at first. Private security wasn't uncommon in HOA neighborhoods, but there was something in his eyes, a sharpness, almost a hunger, that made her pause for just a second. She shook it off and continued walking toward her home. That man was Greg, a volunteer security officer with no real training, just a title that fed his ego and a badge that looked official enough to fool others. Greg had been restless all day, convinced he needed to prove his worth. When he saw Angela, he let his assumptions guide him instead of reason. To him, she didn't fit. To him, she was suspicious. Angela didn't know it yet, but she had become the target of Greg's misguided mission. His hand lingered dangerously close to his weapon as he began following her, his footsteps slow, his eyes locked on her back. Angela's instincts, honed by years of FBI service, flared immediately. Something was off. Something told her this quiet walk home was about to turn into something much more dangerous. Greg had always wanted power, but never truly earned it. The HOA had given him a small position, neighborhood security, and to him it felt like a badge of honor. He wasn't trained, he wasn't licensed, but he wore his patched-up uniform like a soldier heading into battle. In his mind, the neighborhood needed him to stay safe, and today when he spotted Angela, he decided this was his moment. Angela walked steadily, groceries in hand, eyes forward, yet her senses picked up the shift in energy behind her. The sound of Greg's shoes scraping the sidewalk wasn't like a casual passerby. It was deliberate, calculated. Her shoulders tensed. Years of field training whispered inside her head, "You're being tailed." Greg's thoughts raced. "She doesn't belong here. I've never seen her before. Better stop her before she does something." His imagination turned ordinary movements into threats. To him, Angela's calm walk was suspicious, her silence intimidating. He gripped the edge of his holster, the weight of his gun, giving him a false sense of control. His mind replayed heroic fantasies of catching criminals, of neighbors praising him, of headlines calling him a hero. But none of those fantasies matched reality. Angela slowed her pace slightly, testing. His footsteps slowed too. She stopped for just a second to shift her grocery bag, and Greg froze awkwardly. She didn't even need to look. She already knew. This wasn't coincidence. She was being followed. Finally, his voice cut through the stillness, harsh and sharp. "Hey, you live around here?" Angela turned her head just enough to see him. His face was tight with suspicion, his eyes narrowed, as if he had already decided the answer. She kept her voice calm, even. "Yes, I live right down this street." But Greg wasn't listening. To him, calm words were excuses. His heartbeat quickened, his mind jumping to conclusions that had no foundation. Angela took a slow breath. She had been in dangerous standoffs before, but this situation was different. This wasn't an armed suspect or a planned mission. This was her neighborhood, her home. And yet, she realized with a sinking weight, she wasn't safe here either. Greg stepped closer, his hand still grazing the weapon at his side. Neighbors across the street noticed. Curtains shifted. A few people peeked from porches, sensing something was wrong, but too stunned to intervene. Angela's instincts tightened like a coil. She knew one thing for certain. This was not going to end with just a simple conversation. The air grew heavier with each step Greg took toward her. Angela kept her posture steady, shoulders square, eyes calm, though inside her tactical instincts were running at full speed. She had faced armed suspects in high-stakes raids, but this was different. She was unarmed, carrying groceries, and in her own neighborhood, a place that was supposed to feel safe. Greg's voice boomed across the quiet street. "Stop right there! Don't take another step!" The command was loud enough for neighbors to hear. Curtains slid open. A mother hurried her child inside while another neighbor pulled out a phone recording from a safe distance. The ordinary afternoon had shifted into a stage of fear. Angela turned slowly, placing her grocery bags down by the curb. Her movements were deliberate, calm, and precise. She knew sudden gestures could escalate an already fragile situation. Looking directly at Greg, she spoke with measured clarity. "I told you, I live here. That's my home right down the street." But Greg's eyes betrayed doubt and suspicion. His breathing grew shallow, adrenaline pushing him into a dangerous state. His hand now rested fully on his holster, thumb brushing the snap that kept his weapon secure. He was no longer just a man on patrol. He had convinced himself he was in the middle of an arrest. "You think you can fool me?" he snapped. "I haven't seen you here before. This is private property, and I'll call the police if you don't cooperate." Angela's voice didn't waver. "Sir, lower your voice. You're making a mistake." Her tone was so calm, so commanding that even a few neighbors watching felt the difference. She wasn't pleading. She wasn't nervous. She was steady, as if she had faced this exact situation 100 times before. But Greg misread her composure as arrogance. He took a step closer. His hand pulled the gun halfway out of its holster, and the metallic glint caught the sunlight. Gasps spread among the onlookers. A child cried out from a porch. The moment felt unreal, like a scene no one ever expected to witness in their neighborhood. Angela's pulse quickened, but her exterior remained still. Her mind calculated every possibility: distance, angle, reaction time. She knew one wrong move from him could turn this into a tragedy. In that instant, the world seemed to shrink. Just Angela, Greg, and the unspoken danger between them. The quiet suburban street was no longer quiet. Every sound seemed amplified: the chirping of birds, the creak of a porch swing, the faint rustle of leaves carried by the wind. But above it all was the sharp crack of Greg's voice and the heavy silence of neighbors holding their breath. Angela stood tall, her grocery bags resting at her feet, her eyes locked on Greg. She could see the fear behind his aggression, the desperation of someone trying to prove himself. She had seen that look before, in suspects backed into corners, in rookies who didn't yet understand the weight of their choices. And she knew how dangerous that look could be. "Sir," she said, her voice firm but steady, "you need to lower your weapon, right now." Greg scoffed, shaking his head, his grip tightening. "Don't tell me what to do. I'm in charge here. You don't belong, and I'm not going to let you cause trouble." His words carried no true authority, but his stance made up for it. His finger now hovered dangerously close to the trigger. Every second stretched longer, the air so tense it felt like the entire block was holding still. Neighbors whispered in hushed tones from behind curtains and fences. One man muttered, "She does live here. I've seen her before." But Greg wasn't listening to anyone. He was locked in a tunnel vision where Angela was the threat, and he was the hero about to save the day. Angela adjusted her stance, planting her feet firmly. Her voice dropped into the commanding register she used in the field. Low, steady, carrying authority without shouting. "If you point that weapon at me again, you will regret it. Think very carefully before you take another step. The street seemed to freeze. The words hit like a cold splash of water, drawing a gasp from several onlookers. It wasn't a threat spoken in anger. It was a promise spoken with certainty. Something in Angela's eyes told the truth. She was not afraid, and she was not powerless. For the first time, Greg faltered. His hand trembled slightly on the weapon. His mind raced, fighting between the image of himself as a hero and the unsettling calm radiating from the woman before him. Angela remained perfectly still, her every muscle controlled. She couldn't reveal who she was yet, not until the moment was right. For now, she needed him to feel her strength without explanation, to realize on some instinctive level that he had stepped far beyond his limits. The standoff was no longer just about suspicion. It was about control, authority, and a dangerous line Greg had crossed without understanding who he was truly up against. The moment stretched like a taut wire, ready to snap. Greg's hand jerked, and in one swift motion, the gun was out of its holster. The metallic gleam caught the sunlight, sending a shiver across the block. Gasps echoed from the neighbors who had gathered in silence, their phones recording every second. "Hands up, now!" Greg barked, his voice cracking under the weight of his own fear. Angela didn't flinch. Slowly, deliberately, she placed her palms in the air, fingers spread, a gesture meant to calm rather than submit. Her breathing was steady, her mind razor sharp. Years of FBI operations had conditioned her to read situations like maps, and this one was clear. Greg was unstable, and one wrong move could end in disaster. "Listen to me," Angela said, her voice calm but commanding. "Put the weapon down. You are making a mistake that you cannot undo." Greg's grip tightened, sweat trickled down his temple. His heart raced faster than his thoughts could keep up. To him, the silence of the neighbors watching wasn't disapproval, it was pressure. Pressure to act, to prove he wasn't just some volunteer in a cheap uniform. He needed to feel in control. "You think you can talk your way out of this?" he snapped. "Not today, not with me." Angela lowered her arms slightly, only enough to point at the grocery bags on the sidewalk. "I was carrying food, not danger. Look at the evidence right in front of you." But Greg shook his head violently, his paranoia drowning out reason. No, you're lying. You don't live here. You're trespassing, and I'm doing my well." His voice cracked louder, desperate, as though he was trying to convince himself more than anyone else. The neighbors began to murmur, their whispers growing louder. One woman called out, "She's telling the truth. That's Angela. She's lived here for years." Another voice chimed in, "Greg, stop this. You're going too far." But Greg's focus tunneled on Angela. His knuckles whitened around the gun. His world had shrunk into a dangerous delusion where he was the last line of defense. Angela drew in a long, steady breath. She knew this was it, the tipping point. If she let him keep control, someone could get hurt. She had faced hardened criminals with weapons pointed at her before, but there was something uniquely tragic about this moment. A neighbor blinded by his own need for power. Her eyes hardened with resolve. She was done being the target of his fantasy. "Greg," she said firmly, her voice slicing through the heavy air, "you have no idea who you're pointing that gun at." The street fell into silence, every neighbor waiting for what would come next. For a moment, the entire block stood frozen. A grown man, trembling with a gun in his hand, stood face to face with a woman who carried herself with an unshakable calm. The air buzzed with tension, neighbors barely daring to breathe. Angela looked directly into Greg's eyes, her voice controlled and low, the kind that cut through noise without needing to rise. "You're seconds away from making the worst decision of your life." Greg blinked, but his grip remained firm. His chest heaved, adrenaline boiling through his veins. "You're bluffing," he spat, though his voice wavered. "I know what I'm doing. You don't belong here, and I'm not afraid to act." Angela slowly exhaled, her mind sharp as glass. This was the moment. She had given him every chance to back down. Now the truth had to come out. both for her safety and to snap Greg out of his delusion. Very carefully, she lowered one hand toward her jacket pocket. Neighbors gasped, thinking she might make a sudden move. Greg's finger twitched dangerously near the trigger. But Angela's composure never cracked. She pulled out a slim black leather case and with a single motion, flipped it open for all to see. The gold badge glistened in the sunlight. The embossed letters reflected authority that no volunteer uniform could ever match. "I am Special Agent Angela Johnson," she declared, her voice steady, filling the street. "Tactical Commander with the Federal Bureau of Investigation." The crowd erupted in gasps. A woman's hand flew to her mouth. Someone whispered, "She's FBI," and phones zoomed in closer to capture the scene. Greg's face drained of color. His bravado collapsed in an instant, the weight of reality crashing down on him. His gun trembled violently now, no longer in false confidence but in shock and panic. Angela's tone hardened, carrying the unmistakable authority of someone who had led armed raids and stood in command of dangerous standoffs. "Holster your weapon, immediately." The words were not a suggestion. They were an order, sharp and unyielding. Greg faltered, his pride and fear colliding in the pit of his stomach. He stammered, I didn't know." "You didn't ask," Angela cut in. "You didn't listen. And you just pointed a firearm at a federal agent in front of half this neighborhood. Do you have any idea what that means?" Murmurs rippled through the crowd, neighbors shaking their heads, recording every second. The false image of Greg as a protector was shattered, exposed as nothing more than reckless posturing. His hands shook as he fumbled the weapon back into his holster. He stepped back, shrinking under Angela's unwavering gaze. His entire world had flipped in a heartbeat, from authority to humiliation. Angela bent down, calmly lifting her grocery bags again. With absolute control, she added, "You're finished here. This community deserves protection, not reckless threats." The neighbors broke into quiet applause, some calling out support, others muttering disapproval toward Greg. For the first time that afternoon, the balance of power was crystal clear, and Greg knew he had gone too far. The weight of silence hung thick as Greg fumbled his weapon back into its holster. His earlier bravado had evaporated, leaving only trembling hands and a pale, shaken expression. The neighbors who once watched in fear now stood firmly on Angela's side. Whispers swirled through the crowd like wildfire. "She's FBI. He actually pulled a gun on her." What was he thinking? Angela stood tall, groceries in hand once again, her posture calm but her presence commanding. She had no need to shout. Every word she had spoken, every movement she made, had already dismantled Greg's false authority. Moments later, the HOA board members arrived, alerted by frantic phone calls from neighbors. They rushed onto the street, faces tight with embarrassment, as they realized what had unfolded under their so-called security program. Their chosen watchman had just humiliated their community in front of dozens of witnesses. And worse, he had threatened an innocent neighbor who also happened to be a federal agent. Angela turned toward them, her eyes sharp. "This is the man you trusted to represent safety in this neighborhood," she said evenly. "Instead, he created chaos. He pointed a firearm at a resident without cause. Do you understand how dangerous that was?" The board members exchanged uneasy glances, their shoulders sinking under the truth. One cleared his throat awkwardly. We never intended for it to go this far. Greg was just supposed to keep an eye out." Angela cut in, her voice steady but firm. "An eye out is one thing. Recklessly pulling a weapon is another. You put this community at risk." The neighbors murmured in agreement. Several voices rose from the crowd. "She's right. He could have hurt her, or anyone. This is unacceptable." Greg opened his mouth as if to defend himself, but the words died on his tongue. The weight of dozens of eyes staring at him, combined with the quiet authority radiating from Angela, left him exposed and defeated. His role as protector was over. That evening, the HOA board held an emergency meeting. By nightfall, Greg was permanently removed from any role in community security. The neighborhood voted to bring in licensed, trained professionals moving forward. No more makeshift authority, no more reckless power plays. As for Angela, she didn't bask in the attention or gloat in her victory. She walked home quietly, carrying her groceries inside just as she'd intended before the chaos began. But the neighbors didn't forget. They had witnessed courage, not through aggression, but through composure. They had seen a woman stand unshaken in the face of danger, revealing only at the right moment the strength she truly carried. In the days that followed, children on the block waved a little brighter when Angela passed by. Parents greeted her with gratitude, knowing their community was safer simply because she lived among them. And Greg, he faded into the background, his moment of self-importance forever remembered not as heroism, but as a warning of what happens when pride overtakes reason. Angela's story became more than an incident. It became a lesson etched into the memory of the entire neighborhood. Never judge by assumptions, never abuse false power, and never mistake calm for weakness.